Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be discussing 8th house matters, and I know I might sound a little bit too chirpy for how heavy a house the 8th house actually is. The 8th house is widely known as the house of death and rebirth, and yes, it is as dramatic as it sounds. The house of sex, the house of other people's money, and generally the house of shared resources. Now, the 8th house is one of the 3 karmic houses in astrology. So all the planets that you have placed in your 8th house, and if you don't know if you've got any planets in your 8th house, then what you can do is you can use one of the online natal chart generators. I'm going to link one in the description box down below, and you can look at the 8th house and see if you've got any planets there. If you do, then I would say you are more than likely going to have some sort of like karmic undertakings to work through in this lifetime, because the 8th house, along with the 4th and the 12th, is part of the karmic trifecta. Now let us dissect the little house. The little house, I wish it were little. It's usually quite big and heavy when it's populated with planets. Let's see what this is all about. So I've mentioned death and rebirth. So the 8th house isn't necessarily concerned with actual death, even though to some extent, if you've got any planets in the 8th house, then it can indicate the kind of vision that you have about death in general. So for instance, if you have Pluto in the 8th house, now we all know Pluto is the planet of obsession and the planet of intense digging and researching, and the planet that wants to get beneath the surface. So you might become quite obsessed with what happens after death, and you might actually use a lot of your time and effort to investigate what happens after death. Now, if you have, for instance, Saturn in the 8th house, like myself, they say that these people are very reluctant to letting go of life, and they're very reluctant to their body being dissolved after death. That's why we tend to hang on to life for dear life, and this usually results, apparently, in a long life. Now, if you have Jupiter in the 8th house, then you might have quite an optimistic view about what happens after death in general, and it might be very much tied to your religious beliefs, and you might have the faith that whatever happens after death, it's going to be okay, because you're going to go to a much better place and potentially meet God, something along those lines. Now, the 8th house is also a descriptor of all the little deaths that we go through throughout our life, because whenever we pass from one stage or one phase of our life to the other, we leave behind our old selves. So when we pass from childhood to our teen years, and then from our teen years to adulthood, it's like we've left behind a specific portion of our life, and that's why we've died a little, but we are now reborn. So that's why it's called the house of death and rebirth and regeneration. Now, the 8th house is also the house of all the skeletons, most of the skeletons, I'm not going to say all the skeletons that we have hidden in our closet. So it has a very taboo quality to it, the 8th house, and it encompasses that side within us, that dark side within us that we do not want exposed. We are very conscious of it, we are very aware of it, but we want to keep it behind locked doors. Now, anyone who has planets in the 8th house might have a very strong interest in what goes on with people's lives behind closed doors. So, for instance, having Mars in the 8th house might make you a very good detective, a very good investigator, because you can see beneath the surface, and you have this energy for digging into people's lives, to put it bluntly. The 8th house is also the house of psychology. So if you have any planets in the 8th house, you might have a very strong pull towards human psychology and understanding human beings and how their mind works and what their motives are, and especially their dark motives or the dark side within them, or whatever it is that they are trying to keep hidden from you, to keep concealed from you. If you have your sun in the 8th house, the sun is our sense of identity and our sense of ego and our pride, and we might try to keep what makes us proud of ourselves and what we tie our identity to. We might want to keep it hidden and not let it out in the open for everyone to see us. The 8th house is also the house of other people's money and shared resources. That's why, let's say, if you have a populated 8th house, then you might find yourself working with other people's money in some shape or form in this lifetime. Either by working in like banking or looking after other people's funds or investments. Mercury in the 8th house is actually fantastic at looking after other people's money and managing other people's money. But in general, any planetary placement that you have in the 8th house is likely to give you an interest and a pull towards other people's resources. Likewise, if you have planets here, you are likely going to experience money from other people and resources from other people coming your way. For instance, if you have the moon in the 8th house, inheritance might come your way through your mother or through a female relative. If you have Jupiter in the 8th house, let me tell you this, you might attract throughout your life a big amount of money from other people, and it will be as if people just have this need to give you things. The same happens with Venus in the 8th house. Generally, those who have Venus in the 8th house tend to acquire wealth through marriage, and they tend to attract in their life very well-off partners. People who have Venus and Jupiter, I would also say, they tend to attract a lot of energy and resources from other people in general, so not just money. It's as if people have this like openness to give them things, to give themselves to them emotionally, financially, to give their lives away. It's just the magic of having Jupiter or Venus in the 8th house. And last but not least, the 8th house generally refers to shared resources and to how you can make relationships work by sharing things. Now, after the honeymoon period, after you get married in the 7th house, etc., then reality strikes, and you have to give some of yourself away in order to make the relationship work. And your attitude towards giving some of yourself away, be that emotionally, be that financially, be that mentally, spiritually, your attitude towards this is depicted and is described by the sign on the 8th house cusp, and also by the planets that you have here. So let's say you have Saturn, going back to my own 8th house placement. You might be quite reluctant to sharing your resources with other people. You might actually be afraid of sharing your resources with other people. Now, let's say you get a divorce. The planets that you have in the 8th house are going to describe how the division of assets is going to go between the two of you. Let's say you have Jupiter here, it's going to go quite smoothly. If you have Mars, you're going to fight a very, very long drawn battle over resources. If you also have Saturn, again, it might be messy. Also, if you have Saturn in the 8th house or Uranus in the 8th house, your life partners or your partners in general, financial and material situation might be quite volatile with Uranus, and it might be quite grim with Saturn in the 8th house. Just want to put it out there. I don't want to scare anyone off. So guys, let me know if you have any other questions related to 8th house matters. It is not the easiest of houses, but they say that the planets that we have in the 8th house give us power. So once we acknowledge our dark side and once we acknowledge our needs, that usually have to do with our early relationships and our early type of bonding with our parents, because it all stems back to childhood, doesn't it? Once we acknowledge our demons and once we make peace with them, then they don't hold power over us. And in turn, we ourselves gain a lot more power and a lot more self-confidence to power through life. Last but not least, if you do have 8th house placements, do consider psychology as a profession, and also do consider working with other people's money as well, because you're probably going to be very good at it. If you have the sun in the 8th house, you would make a fantastic banker, just to put it out there. Thank you guys, and if you have any other questions, please let me know in the comments below. I'll see you soon. Bye.